Hey you geeks! When this video airs, the Wheel of Time show will be over, but it isn't over as of recording, so I hope it went well. And also, Brandon Sanderson has given us kind of a reader break as he gives us some space between the end of Arc 1 of the Stormlight Archive and his next installment of Ghostbloods. Though Isles of the Emberdark is coming out this fall, I need new content to span the gap. Which brings me to Brandon Sanderson's address last Dragonsteel, where he warned us epic fantasy fans not to be gatekeepers against this new rise in romantasy. And well, I might be a little late to the party. Well, I found that Yarros' brilliant merging of Murtagh and Edward Cullen in leather pants, no less, bends the space-time continuum. Tweenage me? You can't be here. We're talking about my recent discovery of Rebecca Yarros' blending of romantasy and epic fantasy to perfection within her new Empyrean series, and you haven't even read Fourth Wing. But you have, and truth is, I'm not you from the past. I'm your emotional side that you honed into this form in the past because you were an emo kid at one point. And now I get to be your dark horse in your hoity-toity platonic ideals. So you can be cringe and philosophically astute? Me? Cringe? As if? I am here to help you laugh at yourself. You can provide the rationalizations, and I provide the emotions. After all, we're not Gnostics. We can have joy in the mind and the flesh. Okay, she can be philosophically astute. Yes, today we are talking about Rebecca Yarros' Empyrean series from a meta level, as I directly address you viewers who, if you watch my channel, I assume are fans already of epics like the Stormlight Archive or the Wheel of Time. And I feel like romantasy has a lot of romance fans getting them into fantasy, but us epic readers have yet to fully bridge that gap. But after finishing Wind and Truth last January, I hit a massive reading slump. So one of my friends who enjoys romance stories, she pointed me in the direction of Fourth Wing. And I decided to give it a try. So let's talk about why I feel that stories like the Empyrean series is a great recent development in fiction and address some of the problems that epic fans tend to raise against lighter fantasies. First, I'm going to say that the world building is not as flimsy as it first appears. And second, the combining of romance and fantasy tropes fit really well together, but also create a new arena in which authors and readers can play, where we may recognize some things, but they might be playing a completely different game, and it blows my mind in the best way possible. Lastly, I will address the issue of it being smut. Thus, we shall dive into a video of mine that will contain no spoilers beyond the first chapter of Fourth Wing. Why we need books like the Empyrean. On this channel, I analyze a lot of epic fantasy novels that do tend to gravitate towards the masculine audience, although I like books that have good female representation too, for obvious reasons. So now that I'm jumping gears into romantasy, I feel like I owe you guys some apologetics on this change of channel direction. And by apologetics, I mean... Sorry, not sorry about what I said. Seriously, the 100 or so of you guys that actually watched my Murtagh review in January, before I found this book, may I add, should not be surprised that a change like this was coming. But more recently, I was walking in my neighborhood and saw a mother and her elementary school daughter, cute bows in her hair and skirt, talking at the bus stop. The mother was telling her girl that no, it was unlikely that she would be attacked with swords at school today, and it would not be fun at all. The little girl was not buying it. Apparently, she had a dream where she got to use her Elsa powers and smote all the bad guys. This girl needs so many great fantasy books to inspire her imagination in a way that I just never had growing up, and in a way that I hope will foster emotional intelligence. Also, I don't really feel has been addressed in good female representation up to this point. Now, I don't think she should start with Fourth Wing. This is not YA. But I hope the trickle-down effect will bring a new era of emotionally intelligent female characters and not the spare parts of male-dominated fantasy that I had to deal with growing up. Kids these days will never understand the impossible choice teenage girls had to face in 2010. Either you got Dragons and Adventure and boring men with Aragon, or you got interesting, attractive, unhealthy men with the Twilight Saga. Of course, we're going to choose interesting men first. Yeah, we've already made a video about how we did not like Aang when Avatar: The Last Airbender was coming out originally, and that was our favorite animated show at the time, because Zuko's angst and Katara's love made it for us, even if they didn't end up together, which was just wrong. Not to mention, Harry Potter was a whiny git who was not good with his emotions, and of course, as we have told Christopher Paolini to his face, he does not understand the unbridled hotness that is the scarred son of a traitor. Here, yes, Violet Sorrengill, the protagonist of Fourth Wing and the Empyrean, makes dumb decisions that annoy me, as protagonists ought to do. Still, this book has this undeniable appeal to my heart before it appeals to my head. Though it does reach both, it's such just fun in a level that Brandon Sanderson can't reach. Even though I love his books, it's a completely different kind of fun. For starters, from page 2 of Fourth Wing, basically, I could pretty much see where the story was going to end up, but I was determined to still enjoy the journey. The whole thing about putting the journey before the destination really hits the road in stories like Hallmark movies or 2010 and YA novels, where yes, the ending is intuitively obvious to the casual reader, but it's how the characters get there that make all the difference. Now, this is not to say that Fourth Wing is on the same level of either of those genres. Rather, the Empyrean series' excellent writing helps soothe that deep-seated disappointment I've been harboring since the 2010s, and I model myself a lot after Prince Zuko.
I'm never happy.
No one was more shocked than I when the midpoint of Fourth Wing itself gave me the same serotonin rush that I get when reading a Sanderlanche in a Cosmere novel. But this one has dragons and leather. And it does so by making relationships a much more fundamental part of the plot in ways that epic fantasy either cannot or will not do. Relationship-driven plot. Now, romance has been a part of epics and epic fantasy since the Odyssey, and bulwarks like Tolkien definitely included romantic elements in his plot, though it wasn't until Jordan and then Sanderson that actually tried to use some tropes from contemporary romance authors to tell their romance stories. Heck, the Wheel of Time relationships chart is a veritable Gordian knot, and the Far Snows has every single romance cliche from the 90s that one could never ask for again. Please. Yeah, I'm wondering, do epic fantasy snobs have a golden ratio of how much hard world building an author must do before they include a spice scene? Not to mention, if you're Jordan, you can use your world building time to discuss particularly spicy customs in all of your different regions. Heck, basically, if the word custom is in a chapter title, it's going to be talking about spice, though not showing it. Though I've recently learned that there are in fact other types of fantasy than epic fantasy. My reading buddy pointed me towards the sword and sorcery subgenre with novels like Conan the Barbarian, also by Robert Jordan, in part. And you can just see from this cover those bulging pectorals, that ample bosom, that, yeah, this is a book not geared towards people who are entirely interested in world building. So it is not necessary for a fantasy novel to have world building be front and center stage. It helps that it is strong enough to support the plot, but it need not be the main character. Thus, we get stories like Empyrean now, where world building plays second fiddle to the relationships of the characters. World building in its supporting role in Fourth Wing feels more on par with the likes of Pacific Rim or Attack on Titan Season 1. And that's not a bad thing, especially when we remember with epics that most of that pages and pages of world building the author gives us is to remind us that our characters and we...
You know nothing, Jon Snow.
And at least half of that information is going to be wrong or only tangentially relevant to the plot. So, Romantasy just cuts part of that and replaces it with an emphasis on the characters' interpersonal relationships, which does feel so weird, like we're in Navarre's war college, and yet Fourth Wing spends 0 page time discussing the elementary or primary school systems within Navarre. That's because Navarre's school system is completely irrelevant to Violet's emotional investment, and Violet's emotions are what makes the plot. So her friends' interpersonal relationships have a lot to do with her emotions and are therefore essential to the plot in ways that the magic system and physics just ain't. So what we lose when we don't get the physics of magic, we gain by actually getting to keep the friends we make along the way. At least those that survive. Sanderson has this problem I have often complained of ditching the squad in book 2, and Yarros does not have that problem. Yarros is still careful at the very beginning to give us enough information to suspend our disbelief until further information is available. And this is where I'm going to get into the detailed spoilers of Chapter 1, so if you want to skip ahead to the time somewhere on this screen, you go ahead and do that. Now, I don't really feel that this is much of a spoiler because it's the first chapter, and I thought this was intuitively obvious to the casual reader from page 1. I've read The Hunger Games before it was cool and can tell you that any system of government that forces a protagonist, especially a female one, to undergo a rite of passage where she might totally die ain't the good guys. So if you're in on the trope, it is so clear from page 1 that Yarros is cluing us in that Navarre, the home of the protagonist, ain't exactly the good guys, and this should not be novel to epic fantasy readers either. Like, we know that our characters often are acting on misinformation, so why should it surprise us when romantasy authors do the same? And if something seems like, only a villain would do something like this, then maybe we should ask ourselves...
Hans, are we the baddies?
Next, because we know that this book is going to be driven by emotion before reason, we have to be asking if our characters are making decisions that feel right to them. And that's what makes it fun! Now, characters in epic fantasies, of course, make irrational decisions, but the authors love to give us pages sometimes of detailed justifications for why it sounds rational. Heck, Sanderson goes into human psychology rather than just say, he felt angry, period. And that often works for Sanderson. It makes me empathize with his characters on a very deep level, usually. Yarros, however, can say and show a character's highly emotional reaction and leave it at that. And that works for her. And I like it. I also like Sanderson. We can like both, and that is what makes being a book fan so fun. When tropes collide. See, I was very confident that I knew where Fourth Wing was going to go from chapter 1, because in chapter 1 we meet the enemy, who is very, very attractive. And I've seen Jill Barrett's Just Stab Me Now series and read the book, though I'm waiting to do a review of that once the audiobook comes out. And yes, the hot enemy's named Xaden, which I originally spelt with a Z because audiobook listener, and my romance friend corrected me that it's with an X because of course it is. And of course, he is the son of the great betrayer that my reading buddy has dubbed Hot Galbatorix. Now, are we really going to overlook what you've intuitively known since 2010, and that is a tall, dark, handsome stranger who is potentially dangerous, is not just a romance trope, but belongs in epic fantasy as well. Even the great prude J.R.R. Tolkien gave us Strider, who you totally had a crush on before Edward Cullen. Pity how your standards slipped. He was introduced as the villain of Bree, who Barliman genuinely feared, and the movies glossed this over entirely. True, Aragorn was also secretly the king of a lost civilization that was destroyed by water, and Eurasia, you say, was destroyed by fire? How interesting. I'm sure that's a complete coincidence. Are you suggesting that Tolkien would approve of Fourth Wing? Absolutely not. But Tolkien wouldn't approve of so many things that are considered not only acceptable, but bulwarks of epic fantasy today. And one can take inspiration from Tolkien without following specifically in his footsteps. In fact, those that did all kind of stank as writers. But it's totally fine in epic fantasy to give your diminutive protagonist armor that is, what is it?
As light as a feather, and as hard as dragon scales.
And Violet's corset on page is described as going from her collarbone to her waist. And it's the artist's prerogative to make armor as unrealistic and flattering as possible, while it is the author's prerogative to make it practical. And we can be happy with both. So, with Yarros wearing her tropes on her sleeve, it can feel like, especially in Fourth Wing, you know where the story is going. OTP is obvious, and it's just a matter of what friends they make or kill along the way. But as we get deeper and deeper into the Empyrean series, the other stuff suddenly becomes a lot like epic fantasy tropes that romance readers aren't familiar with and aren't exactly aware of what rule changes are occurring under their very noses. So it's like reading a version of that game they play in MASH where one person plays cards, another person plays chess, and a third plays checkers, all on the same board.
What do you mean I lose?
Look, I got a full house. All you got is a lousy pair of checkers. Plus the fact that my 10 of hearts has your bishop ready to convert.
Is he following the rules? What rules?
Which is to say that I, as an epic fantasy reader, can see some pieces moving on the page, like a certain ruby-hilted dagger in a chapter devoted to luck, that goes right over romance readers' heads. And romance readers are distracted in that chapter by the first flirty fight and all the sexual tension it entails. But they're also seeing other tropes that I can't describe because I'm missing them. But I'm okay with missing some of that because I like to be surprised by stories every so often, and subversive sexual tension sometimes surprises me. And speaking of sexual tension, but isn't it smut? Okay, let's address this elephant in the room. I know and respect many people who are Tolkien is only true fantasy fans, and there are those who are in Sanderson's realm that like how prudy he is, and I appreciate their restraint. Talking to my romance reader friends, I've learned that there are varying levels of spice within romance stories. Iron Widow already was too much spice for me, and I backed out of that hard. So, if this is too much spice for you, you can dislike it on that account. I will not judge you. I will say that Yarros had a surprisingly few levels of highly detailed scenes. Only 2, actually, and they were pretty darn skippable plot-wise. Like, it's kind of like a lot of movies I grew up watching as a kid, which probably skews what I am comfortable with in a way that maybe other people are not. I'm adept in the art form of feeling, okay, this is probably where it ends. They started the chapter doing that, and midpoint, something different's gotta happen. Or just a few sentences away from the end of a chapter if midpoint they started doing that. Though since reading The Wheel of Time and reevaluating what I found normal in the media I ingested growing up, I feel like there should be a lot more conversation about what is appropriate protagonist behavior and inappropriate, and how, especially as adults, we address that. For adults can be super comfortable with morally gray characters making morally gray, violent decisions, but once sex gets involved, the conversation stops and puritanical instincts kick in. One of the things I really like about Yarros is how non-toxic this couple actually is to each other, despite their use of premarital spice. Now, especially in Fourth Wing, I think there were better things that the characters should have been doing than having premarital spice. And those are decisions that come back to actually haunt the characters by the end of the book. So I feel like there's a conversation to be had here, and is very different from what I grew up with. And I'm still coping with the general moral guidelines that Twilight imbued on a whole generation of women, that it was okay for men to gaslight you, ostracize you from your friends, stalk you, sneak into your room, watch you sleep, and do a whole host of other unsavory things, so long as he didn't sleep with you before marriage. Though I'm not recommending Fourth Wing for young adults. Not at all. I think as a book for adults, there are 2 scenes that are utterly skippable, and as adults, we can discuss whether or not they have literary merit. I think literarily, it kind of is repetitive. Like, we know that something bad is going to happen now that the 2 have done the deed. So, unlike Sanderson, who has a variety of things his characters can do before this excrement really hits the whirly machine, it's like, oh, we're 2/3 of the way through the book, they're in the bedroom, got it, Yarros, it's about to get real. But I suppose that's just a romance trope that makes it fundamentally different from epic fantasy. Though these two genres start in very different places, Yarros is doing an excellent job of bridging the gap. And I'm helping. I've joined the Empyrean Writers Wiki moderator group, and I'm helping flush out their wiki, because upon joining the group, I discovered they didn't have a single website where they catalog everything their author ever said on the topic. How did they live? They had TikToks. So I recommend you give the series a try. It may surprise you, and stick around if you want to join us on the dark side. Please like, share, and subscribe if you want to see more. Thanks for watching. Bye!